is getting out there sometimes. You have people that know nothing about what they're talking about, post stuff on social media, and all of a sudden everyone believes that. So we're here to get the facts out. We're here to take the wrong stuff and get you the right stuff. And my personal goals this year is going to be helping get this out to the mainstream media colleagues of mine, but also encourage people to want to make space a bigger story and use storytelling to accomplish what we want and to make a difference and get involved in space, whether it's as little as saying, I want to go to space someday and go, or it's actually taking a job in the space community. So hi.
Amazing. Yeah, we're really excited. And in fact, I'm gonna flip your wrong stuff, right stuff too, because there's a positive aspect to the wrong stuff that we're going to talk about a little later, which really gets to this idea that everybody should be welcome in the space industry. So I love that you brought that up, Meredith, because I think it's an important thing to help to start to dispel rumors and biases, right? And things like that have kept a lot of us from getting into space sooner than I think we would have liked to. I mean, I've been a sci-fi lover, Trekkie, for most of my life. And it really truly has guided me in terms of development, right? And how I think about society and Earth and things like that. So I'm excited for that conversation. But yes, let's talk about a few headlines over the last few weeks. I think, and this also points to what Meredith just talked about, which is, most of the time we often hear about failures, right, and things like that, and we want to bring the whole story. So, for example, I'm sure maybe a lot of you have heard about the Peregrine moon lander, right, that launched and was headed to the moon. And it went up on United Launch Alliance's Vulcan Centaur rocket. Astrobotic is the company that built it. And it had some really interesting payload on board to land on the moon, right? And it was remains. And this brought up a whole other conversation about remains on the moon. So, the remains of very famous people from here on Earth and other people. We can get into that kind of conversation, I think, at a different time. But I think what I want to bring up on that is, we've heard about the fuel leak shortly after launch that caused problems with the lander, so much so that it won't be able to actually land on the moon. However, Astrobotic has really done an amazing job at not only communicating, back to Meredith's point about we need really good communicators in this industry, communicating every step of the way what was going on with the lander, and letting us know, but also they're still trying to get stuff done. So they're still conducting experiments, taking pictures. They're still doing as much as they can to get as much out of this particular mission before, unfortunately, the lander does head back to Earth and I probably burn up in the atmosphere. So while its core mission won't succeed, it's still doing things along the way. It's still operating. And that's pretty amazing because I'm going to say, space is hard. I don't like that phrase though. And that's something I want to change on here because it's just a different challenge, and I think oftentimes when people communicate space is hard, it turns a lot of people away. And so the way I want to approach it is it's just a different set of challenges. I mean, we, as human beings, we are incredible at coming up with ways to solve all of these amazing challenges that are set forth in front of us. So instead of saying something is hard, it's just a different challenge that we're going to face together. Again, why we need more people.
Well, and if I can, I'd love to comment on that because I love that
please.
you're digging into that. We hear this quite a bit. I think it was Rod Pyle that really popularized this idea of space is trying to kill you. And we look at like Shackleton, for instance, and these posts of like great in Kennedy's speech about we do it because it's hard, not because it's easy. All of this is to say that it's worthy. And I think this whole connotation was, anything that's not difficult is not worthy. Anything that's not a struggle or doesn't sculpt you or change you in the process isn't really worthy. So I get when people say space is hard. To me, I'm drawn to that. But I think you're right. We need to rephrase this. Maybe it's that space is worthy, that this is a worthy undertaking. And I think about when people like Bill Nye say, oh, why would you go to space? It's so awful out there. It's so nice here. You know, that's what we are as humans at our best. At our best, we are challenging the next horizon, and we're not about the comfort. Comfort is a very temporary state for us. And so I think this is the best of what we are as humans, is expanding. And I love that you talk about the neighborhood, because I refer to the moon as the eighth continent. And I really
Yeah.
think about it as, you know, when we're talking about why would you go to space when you've got Earth, it's like you're in space, you're in a small town, and if you turn around for a moment and look out there, there's all this amazing stuff going on in your neighborhood. You know, our solar system isn't even really that far out. So I want to talk about more about space being worthy. And I think we could
Mhm.
I
still
love
talk
that.
about space being hard, but it's worthy.
And
Yeah,
many of these challenges we're going to have to solve for, especially in agriculture in the next 50 or
absolutely.
100 years. I mean, really shorter than that. So, talking about future technology, whether we ever go to space or not, we still need to solve these same constraints, these same bottlenecks. So, it's kind of a fallacy to say, oh, we never need to do space settlement. Well, we're going to have basically the same exact technologies with the same constraints.
Sure.
And I'll add one more thing, Alberto, about this, because as a scientist, I remember 10, 15 years ago when climate change was the same thing that space is now. People
Yeah.
didn't know a lot about it. People didn't want to talk about it. There was so much misinformation. But now we're passing legislation to help save our planet. Climate change is a top story. It's a top headline. News stations have segments on it. So that was hard as a scientist to make that conversation more and more about climate change. So if we can do that, then we can certainly do space.
Well, that's why I love our next segment. I've got a couple more headlines, but our next segment is talking about weather, which Meredith's going to talk us through. And, we don't consider oftentimes, or we never hear about how space contributes to our weather here on Earth. Just like space debris, you can see in my background here, same thing. Space debris is a problem, but oftentimes we only think it's a problem in space. It's not, because that stuff, a lot of that debris burns up in the atmosphere. And I think NASA finally released a report late last year indicating chemicals in the atmosphere left by burning debris that comes in through the atmosphere. And so there's a lot of things related to climate change specifically where space has a big impact on it, and we want to learn more about that. We want to kind of pull back the curtain on that too. So real quick, a couple other cool headlines this week. I think tomorrow, right, the Axiom Space, their third private astronaut launch, is supposed to go tomorrow to the International Space Station. This time it's a 4-person all-European crew, which is awesome. Showing there's a lot of international collaboration going on. It's not just about the U.S. It's about, again, all of us across the world, all of these amazing agencies and companies working together. So this is a great example of that. And then the third one I wanted to bring up, because so NASA was supposed to have published a space-based solar power report in September of 22, and they just published it late last week. So this is important because space-based power is something to think about and to learn about. And again, that can, to Daniel's point earlier, can help us here on Earth. So if you get a chance, look up NASA space-based solar power, look up their report, so you can at least get an understanding of where they're coming at it. But do some research into that too, because that space-based solar power is a big thing right now in the space industry that, again, can bring a lot of great impact here to us on Earth. So, all right, it's time for the weather.
I feel like I needed the opening, and now the first alert forecast with Meredith Garofalo. But this is better,
Yes.
right? This is space weather we're going to talk about. But space weather, our weather here on Earth, it's connected. I mean, let's start off with just focusing on that in general. Every time we talk about the aurora, the northern lights, and people want to see it, that's space weather. When we have conversations about the solar cycle and the sun, that impacts us on Earth. We're looking at the solar weather, the solar forecasts. So there's a lot of things, even when you think about your car, the satellite radio or GPS systems or navigation systems. When we have solar flares, that impacts the power grids. I mean, there are so many ways that what's happening outside of this planet is impacting us right here at home. And again, it's something that's not really been talked about. And we have our daily weather forecast, so why not start making the space weather forecast? and having that as part of our national headlines or our local headlines. And it's something that's going to take time. Like everything we were just talking about, is you need to have change happen by starting something and making it constant and knowing it's going to be hard, and it's something that's going to take some time before it becomes the normal. And so with one of the things I was pulling up, because I wanted to make sure to have some really exciting stats to share with you that you might not have known otherwise. So we talk about what drives our climate. As we know, the big thing right now is our climate is changing, whether you believe it or not. We have had some of the hottest months and years on record within the last decade. That's science. That's stuff we're talking about here on Earth. But did you know that the sun is one of the 4 major things that drives our climate? I know, right? I mean, we think about sun in our daily forecast. Today, is it going to help warm our temperatures up? Is it going to melt the snow? Are we going to have a cloudy day? But then let's go out into space. And the sun has a lot of things that are happening. For example, we look at the greenhouse gases, the sun impacts that. The El Nino that we talk about, or having that warmer, or La Nina, colder weather pattern, the sun impacts that as well. And so when we talk about that, I mean, you've got the 11-year solar cycles that we have. And depending on how much wavelength that we get that's coming in from the sun, that's going to impact our climate here on Earth. And so, again, these are things we're talking about now, but that should be something that we talk about more, because I'm sure people watching right now are saying, yeah, that makes sense. And if you're a meteorologist or somebody in the news business watching, that's a pretty good story, because, we're going into new solar cycles. That should be something that's a headline. That's something our station scientists should be talking about, because that is going to impact us here on Earth. So I actually write for space.com on the side. I'm a freelance writer for that. And I actually did a story at the end of December that I want to share with you. And after I talk and we get to the next part, I'll put the link there. But the actual government agencies, such as National Science Foundation, NASA, the Department of the Air Force, they actually passed some legislation so that they can all work together to help improve the funding and the support to our Space Weather Prediction Center and that program. So this was in the middle of December, and they basically signed an agreement saying, we're going to start focusing more on different solar events and the types of solar events that are happening. We're going to study more. We're going to get more information out there. We're going to do more research, and we're going to make this a priority, which I think is a great step, because as we know, when you get the government, when you get organizations on board, the more people that are involved, the more change and the progress that we can make. So they actually signed this memorandum. They call it the Memorandum of Agreement for Space Weather Research to Operations to Research Coverage, whatever. It's a long, drawn out thing. But basically, it's going to be getting organizations here on Earth that can help with space weather forecasting and start to make it a bigger deal and a bigger priority. Now, of course, we need to start to see things happen. But I mean, their goal right now is going to be working together. So as space weather events, just like our weather events on Earth here, start to happen more and more frequently, we're going to be covering and putting more funding into looking at these solar maximums, the peak of the solar activity, because that's going to peak next year, 2025. So getting on that now and seeing things and, having more public awareness of when there's a solar flare. Yeah, we can talk about the Northern Lights and how cool it is to see that, but how is it impacting us? And are there changes? And is this going to be a big enough one that is going to make a change? Because as we know with climate, as it changes over the years, our climate impacts us here. As we have more and more warming temperatures globally, which is happening, that's impacting our storms. That's allowing storms to strengthen more. That's why during hurricane season, we are having more and more warmer sea surface temperatures. And that is a major ingredient for these storms to become more intense. And we have more category 4 and 5 hurricanes. We have rapid intensification, which I'm sure you've heard about a lot in the last 5 years, happening with these storms. And it's all tied into not just the weather here on Earth, but it's tied into the sun cycle, and it's tied into space weather impacting that as well. So there's a lot of different ways that space weather should be talked about more. And if you have any questions, I think I actually saw something in the chat about it, and I'm very curious to see. Let's see what it says here. Yeah, there's been a lot of information that has been missed. I have to agree. But I think that's why now, as more and more scientists like myself are coming out and saying, hey, this is a big deal. we need to start focusing on space weather as much as we're putting money into our satellites like the GOES satellite program and the JPSS satellite program to help with forecasting climate and help with us forecasting weather daily here on Earth, and putting more outlooks with getting that model data that's going to help us as meteorologists especially be able to make these forecasts. Well, space weather needs to be just as important. Space weather needs to come into that. So I really am excited to see where it goes. And I really do hope moving forward, as this becomes a bigger deal, we can get this into our local newscast. We can say, okay, we're not just talking about the Northern Lights. We're talking about a solar cycle. What is a solar cycle? Because I mean, most people that look are like, okay, I didn't know the sun has a solar cycle. And I've heard that. So I really think in the years to come, from the science perspective of things, it's going to be working with these public and private organizations to say, okay, how can we get this information out there? And how can we make people better understand, just like the weather here on Earth, how the weather in space is impacting us? So I'm excited. I look forward to helping that conversation get going. And if you're watching right now, I saw a couple people from the media watching. Let's talk about it. Let's get you connected to those science experts so we can do that and start getting those stories out there, and then getting that picked up by all the networks, because it starts with us to make a change. And as we are going to talk more about later, the communicating, getting the right stuff out there, getting the facts out there, and making sure it's getting into the hands of people that have a truth in what they're saying, so people can trust you. Just like people trust me as a meteorologist when I come on the air and I have to talk to you about what's happening. I want people to be able to say, hey, we trust Meredith to give us a space weather forecast, and we know the information she's getting is facts, and this is how it's going to impact us. So I'm excited. I could probably talk about space weather all morning.
But actually,
but
I have a
know,
question for you about space weather, Meredith.
Sure.
Can you help us understand a little bit more about how emissions from the sun impact things like satellites, storm patterns on the Earth? Like, exactly what is the interplay between those, like solar flares, for instance, and our biological or planetary systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I am starting to learn more and more about space weather. My degree is a Bachelor of Science in Meteorology. And so I'll admit that I'm still learning a lot, but I can tell you, for example, emissions, that affects greenhouse gases, and that's going to impact the rise of our temperature globally, for example. When we talk about solar flares, I mean, if you think about it, if our astronauts are in space and they don't know a solar flare is coming, that could be catastrophic for the team, because they need to monitor the timing of that. And if we've got astronauts in space, or if we have people that are out there traveling, that could disrupt communications, that could disrupt, the lights. If you think about it, they say that, don't look into the sun on a solar eclipse. It's kind of the same thing if you think about it in space, right? You don't want your astronauts out there and they don't know it's coming, and they look at a solar flare as it's coming through, and next thing you know, you've got a bunch of blind astronauts on a rocket ship. So it doesn't seem like a big deal until you put it into perspective like that, but it is something that's going to have to be like a weather forecast. If there's a tornado outbreak, that could be forecast for us across the Midwest. If there's going to be a very highly disruptive solar flare that's coming towards our ship, or even with our satellites out there and whatnot, we got to be prepared for that, right?
Absolutely. So I think
Does that answer your question?
It does, actually. I think it's important that we have more of this focus on how space weather impacts local weather, because really we are, I often get this, mentality of, oh, well, that's out there and we're over here.
Right.
But really, we're sitting like a boat in the ocean. If you're a tiny canoe in the ocean, you're going to want to pay attention to the waves and the storm patterns. Like, that's going to absolutely impact you. And the same thing with our planet. We are sitting in the middle of space, like this little canoe, and we have this gigantic ball of plasma bursting, solar radiation towards us and magnetism towards us.
Right.
That's going to impact us. So we can't really afford to ignore it. And as we progress in the sciences, and as we are looking at entering into space in a big way, that's going to be part and parcel to the bread and butter of weather every single day. So I think it's great that you're drawing this focus for us.
Oh, absolutely. You think about moon cycle, or, how the moon affects the tides, and think about during high tide and how, we have shifts in patterns in space, like we're talking about, but you continuously get high tides. You're looking at beach erosion. You are looking at washing away our coastlines, bigger waves, bigger surf when we have storms coming in with high tides. It's destroying our coastlines. When I was living in California, these constant storms with these larger waves and those higher tides coming in with the changing cycles, that's all from space, and that's impacting us because homes are falling off cliffs now because we have so much beach erosion and coastal erosion that's happening. And as the warming happens, think about it, you have the rise in sea levels. That's not going to be helping our coastlines either. So it all connects together. And you're right, Inara. This is why we need to take that next step and say, if we're going to be talking about weather, our meteorologists almost should train in space weather moving forward. Maybe organizations and universities should have specific programs on space weather that our meteorologists coming into the television broadcasting world have classes in space weather. If that was available when I was in college, I probably would have minored in it.
Yeah, well, and this also, I mean, this ties back to the fact that, everybody on Earth, we've all looked up at the sky, and ever since, human beings came to be, we've attributed these sorts of phenomena caused by space to magic, right? Or to other things. But in truth, a lot of those things that affect our lives here on Earth are caused by space, or caused by the moon, and gravitational pull and things like that. And so it's, as we learn more and more about that, I think it's I don't know, it's just kind of cool, right? Because again,
Right.
8 billion of us on Earth, we're experiencing a lot of the same things that tie directly to something happening in space.
Exactly.
And it's not a static system. It's interesting. You never, like, in history, learn about like
Yeah.
the history of the solar system, and the history of space weather, right? And the sun. And it's something
Right.
that will change in the future. And people often equate Earth to Mother Earth, but it's really like a great grandmother Earth. Like, if you look at it thermally, like it's kind of scary, billions of years, and we've got like 200 million years till it gets really hot here, and oceans boil off. So like in the grand scheme, I think for a lot of people in the space community, they have that long-term wow thinking and kind of realization of place in the universe, and place in time. And it really, I think that for me, that was a driving force. I think once you kind of figure out you're made of stardust, and just how that speck of dust, those kind of moments, those either like stop you and kind of direct your brain in a different direction for the rest of your life, or I guess you just go on to watching cat videos or something. I don't know.
Well, I always like to say you leave a sparkle wherever you go. So now literally we are with the stardust within us, right?
Love it.
Well, this was great. Again, I could talk about this forever, but we have Inara up next, who's going to talk more about events and move this segment along. And just by the way, everyone that's watching, put your comments below. If we don't get them right now, we have a part at the end where we'll be doing a Q&A. And we also have a discussion coming up where it's kind of going to be opening the floor to comments and stuff. So if you want to talk more about something, you want to hear more about something, you have a comment on what we're all sharing in our individual segments, post away, comment away. We want to hear from you, because that's the thing is, the four of us are the hosts and having a conversation, but we want to have a conversation with you too. We want to know what you want to talk about and learn about from us.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there's any topic you want to hear about in space, absolutely bring it up. And I'd love to share a little bit of a surprise. We're going to be doing on the street segments. So you'll see us at conferences and events. You'll see us in local neighborhoods. So there'll be opportunities to interact with us live as well. And we'd love to, answer those space questions or hit those topics that you think are really important. And I think oftentimes we hit some of the same topics in some of these events, but we really want to do something different this year and find those niches that haven't been well talked about. I'm going to be talking about conferences and events. This is a huge year for events. We have a normal cycle that we do every year. We kind of have the same events every year that people go to, and then we have some outliers. But this year, things are really getting shaken up. So first off, I want to talk about something that Ubaldo and I'll be participating in. It's the Space Regulatory Boot Camp. And this is pretty exciting. This is a group of attorneys that were on Capitol Hill and, making quite a bit of money and playing the usual game. And they didn't want to keep doing that. So they stepped outside that system and they created a whole new pathway for law. And they realized that of all these different systems and industries that have been de-siloed, that have been kind of brought down to earth and made accessible, law hadn't. Law is very, elite, and you have to speak a special language, and there's a lot of strange pits that you can fall into, and red tape everywhere. And so they were seeing the frustration of especially space organizations and companies that were trying to get through all of that and figure out the system. And they wanted to de-silo that and make that simpler for them. So they created this whole series called the Space Regulatory Bootcamp. And this year it'll be in Albuquerque, New Mexico from March 4th to 7th. Ubaldo and I will actually be there live on the ground. But if you run a space organization or a space company, this is the perfect opportunity for you to get some amazing inside information and cut through a lot of this heartache and get straight to how to structure your organization, how to make the most out of interacting with the government. It's a phenomenal series. And you can check that out at acsp.space. That's acsp.space, and it will be listed under training. Ubaldo and I will be there covering it, interviewing some of the people there, but also talking about this very important topic of how do we make things more accessible as far as the legal system. We talk a lot about making space more accessible as far as like DEI, for instance, or getting the public more involved and allowing them to play more with us. But really, behind the scenes, so many people who create organizations and companies find that this industry is extremely inaccessible, even those who come from the highest levels of other industries. So oil and automotive, for instance, mining, they come in with a deep understanding of finance and structures, and they get lost. So this is a phenomenal opportunity for them as well to kind of streamline that process. And again, that's acsp.space. I also want to talk about a pretty amazing opportunity. It's a little bit further off, and this will be December 19th through 29th, 2024. And a good friend of mine, Chris Bosshausen, is bringing William Shatner and astronaut Scott Kelly to Antarctica on a cruise, and you can be on that cruise. So not exactly a conference, but phenomenal opportunity. So I can't think of a better team up of sci-fi and science than this. We've got Captain Kirk himself and astronaut Scott Kelly. The tickets are $35,000 for a suite, and that's for 1 or 2 people. And they're trying to get everything done by March. So tickets, from what I understand, they're already quite a bit through the tickets. They're going pretty fast, obviously. And you can find out more about that at space2c.io. And that's SPACE number 2, SEA.io, space2c.io. A phenomenal opportunity that probably won't come again. So you can go to Antarctica with an astronaut and Captain Kirk. Check that out. And then one of my favorites, I do want to talk about one of our usual space conferences. It is, it's one of the usual yearly ones, but it is different every single time. And that's the National Space Society's ISDC conference, International Space Development Conference. They're bringing together actors, they're bringing together scientists, leaders in the industry. They've got missions for children and education in space. They're going to be talking about entrepreneurial pathways in the exosphere. They're going to be having cosmic conversations with a pretty top level voices in the space industry. This is always one of my favorite events of the year. ISDC is pretty amazing. And NSS, if you don't know, they have a pretty amazing legacy. They are directly descended from Jerry O'Neill and the L5 Society. So they're one of the first organizations to split off and be part of the real revolution to make space accessible. And if you don't know the history there, we had space basically in the Apollo era. It belonged to the government. It was a national defense strategy. It belonged to, NASA. And then we had this kind of revolution with people like Jerry O'Neill and Timothy Leary. They decided, hey, why can't we be part of this? And so they created the L5 Society. And from the L5 Society came organizations like the National Space Society. And that led directly to SpaceX, Blue Origin. And so you see this kind of lineage from government space to these organizations to private space now. So their ISDC is kind of a cultural archetype for how we do space conferences. And you can catch that at isdc.nss.org. And that will be in LA this year. So definitely check that out. Worth traveling for if you're not in the area, but quite a few people here I think might actually be in that area. And then the next up is Space Symposium. So Space Foundation is hosting Space Symposium in Colorado Springs from April 8th to 11th. And you can catch them at their website, spacesymposium.org. And this one is more looking at space professionals. So you can network. This is a phenomenal opportunity to pass those digital business cards, or if you still have physical ones, I'm fond of physical business cards. This is great for space professionals to network. You can find suppliers, you can find partners. I definitely recommend that one. And again, that will be in April 8th to 11th in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And then last, I want to talk about total eclipse. This year, we have the total eclipse. And Meredith, I actually don't know. I didn't prepare for this, and I'm glad I didn't because I want to bring you in on this. Talk about the total eclipse. How often does this happen? I know it's not very often.
No, it's a rare occurrence. And so I know, I believe it was it 2017 or 2018? Sometimes my memory is old, but I don't have my notes in front of me. But you might remember the last one when we had the totality, and there were cities across the country that were in the path of totality, where literally for a short period of time, as you have the perfect alignment of everything, it goes dark. Like night in the middle of the day. And this is going to happen again for us this year. And some places, let's see, Google the places, but I know.
Yeah, let's talk about the path of totality, because there's actually a path through the United States, especially in Mexico, where certain cities will be on the exact path of totality, meaning that you'll get the best effect of this dark suddenly happening.
Oh, I'm so excited to put this up.
For sure. And Texas is where most of the festivals will be happening. But yeah, please share with us where the path is.
Yes, I'm pulling it up right now, some of the major locations. So this is great. So, places like Dallas, Texas, Idabel, Oklahoma, Little Rock, Arkansas, Poplar Bluff, Missouri, Paducah, Kentucky, Carbondale, Illinois, Evansville, Indiana, my hometown, Cleveland, Ohio, Erie, Pennsylvania, Buffalo, New York, Burlington, Vermont, Lancaster, New Hampshire, and ending in Caribou, Maine. And this is literally something you can go to, which I think is exciting, Inara. Brownsville, Texas. I'll have to zoom in and look. I was just listing some of the major cities in the path of totality. And actually, I'll post the map in this group too, so you can see. But all these cities are having major events. And I know Inara is going to be part of one in Dallas. I'm going to be part of one in Dallas. So you'll want to look and find out with some of these events close to you, or hey, make a trip or a vacation out of it, because I mean, I've never seen it. I've only seen the partial. I was in the path of, it wasn't near me in Denver when it happened last time, but I was close enough, and to see it was cool. But I can't imagine just staying there in the middle of the day and it just being nighttime. And apparently the animals go crazy. It's apparently a weird, incredible feeling, but you'll want to be a part of that.
And that'll be April 8th, 2024. So 2 of these events I want to highlight, and there's a ton of these, and where there aren't, I encourage you to create them. And these can be really elaborate, or these can be family and friends, but don't miss this. This is a pretty big deal, and it's pretty awe-inspiring. So April 8th is the kind of the center point, but there will be an Eclipse Fest hosted by Loretta Whitesides. She's a phenom within the space industry, and you can catch her event at eclipsefests.webflow.ie. And her events will be from the 6th to the 9th, 2024. She's got a pretty amazing lineup. I believe she might actually have Buzz Aldrin of the Buzz Aldrin Foundation there. There's going to be music, artists, astronauts, and more. So check that out. And then the other one is hosted by Ari Eisenstadt, and that's the Texas Eclipse. ctexaseclipse.com. Again, it'll be around the same time period. And if you go to their website, they have a pretty packed schedule. I'll be speaking at that one. And if you check out the website, the lineup is just phenomenal. So many amazing people and musicians will be there. It's going to be a huge festival. Speakers, musicians, performers. You're going to love this. So again, that's ctexaseclipse.com. So
can I add one too, Inara, really quick?
Yeah, please do.
Just before I forget, the one I'm going to be a part of, and there's going to be a lot more information, is actually going to be at the Cotton Bowl in Texas, where they have the major football game. NOAA's putting this on with NASA and the National Science Foundation. A lot of stuff that's still in the works. But once I have that information and I can confirm all of my role I'm going to be playing, I will make sure to get that out to the group and put it out there as well. But I mean, it just sounds like there's so many ways you can participate. I know Cleveland, my hometown, one of the local stations is putting on a festival. So just get involved. This is cool, right?
Absolutely. And I think what's great about the Eclipse Fest is that it is very accessible. You don't need a degree. You don't need a background in the industry to be part of this, gathering of human beings. And especially the one that Ari Eisenstadt is going to be hosting. I mean, we're looking at astronauts, scientists, musicians, physical performers. It's just going to be a celebration of humanity and bringing us together. And, I can't think of a better way to really get us looking up. We talk about this problem of people not looking up and not really paying attention to space, but you can't ignore it when we make the whole sun go quiet. So this will be a great time to bring people together. And I want to wrap it there. I think there's hundreds of other events, and I encourage you to kind of look into what space events might be in your area. Think about maybe creating them as well if that's something that's, you know, kind of in your purview. But there's always something amazing going on around you in space.
Can I add one more, Anara?
Please
Actually,
do.
the satellite conference, if you're into satellites, is in Washington, D.C., and that's going to be from March 18th to the 21st. It's at the conference center. It's a great one if you're somebody that is interested in learning more about science, learning more about satellites, whether it's science or technology. And I'm actually going to be hosting a panel that talks about how satellites are helping our first responders and organizations like FEMA. So that'll be on that Thursday morning at 10 a.m. It's going to be a great lineup. But like Anara said, if you have events, share them with us. Let us know, tag us, because that's the thing is we want to get these events out there. And especially if we're going to be at these events, we want to meet you, right? We want to get more topics that we can have during the show.
Well, and that brings up an
Absolutely.
important point. If you're hosting an event, think about bringing the Liftoff crew. All of us are public speakers. We've all been to several of these. So we will be speaking this year at quite a few of them. But if you want to book us, we're available.
Yeah, that would be a blast. Because again, you know, our whole point is to give voice to all of you. And so, you know, feel free to reach out. We want to use our platform to give you the opportunity to tell your stories and talk about your events in the space industry. The one cool thing about a lot of space conferences is oftentimes they will have a public day. So like usually on like the last day of the conference, they'll open it up to the public. And a lot of times they do that for education reasons. So you can bring your kids and things like that. So I think Satellite does that.
Yeah.
The IAC, which is the International Astronautic Conference that happens around the world every year. They pick a new place. This year, it's in October in Milan, Italy. But I know, right? And so a little wine and some pasta and some
Hey, you've got me
steaks.
sold at wine and pasta.
Done,
I'm
exactly.
a Sicilian right here.
Yeah, we should do a segment there is all I'm saying. But the last day of that conference, they always open it up to the public. So you know, look for those opportunities to be able to go for free to check. You get to come in and you get to check out all the space companies and the space agencies and their booths. And a lot of times they have cool giveaways. But you get to see some of the amazing things that are happening in this industry. So yeah, that was awesome, Anara. Thank you for that. Real quick, I wanted to talk about work in space before we jump into kind of our general conversation, because again, I myself didn't believe it was possible to be able to work in this industry just a few years ago. But now I'm doing work in this industry and it's really freaking amazing. You know, this is what I see myself doing for the rest of my life. And so the opportunity is there. You have to look for it. But more and more, the industry is opening itself up to just a lot of different skill sets and a lot of different types of people. And so when you're considering, you know, as we talk to younger generations who are finishing up school, going into college, considering what they want to do, you know, you can get to space through a lot of different things that you're interested in. Medicine, right? Healthcare is a huge deal. Like Daniel touched on that. There's no reason you can't go into medical school or some kind of medical profession as a stepping point to getting into the space industry. Because as we move, you know, out to work in space and on the moon and beyond, we're obviously going to need that, right? We're going to need medical care, and it's going to be really different because there's a lot of different things out there that will impact our human bodies. So that's something to think about. Communications, as Meredith talked about, you know, marketing that falls under marketing, sales. You know, more and more we need people who can tell a better story about what's happening in this industry. And so that's everything from photography to videography, animation. You know, we need all of that. So if those are on your radar in terms of career and you're looking to really, you know, get into this industry, you can. And then Inara, you had mentioned some really cool ones that, you know, people hadn't necessarily thought about or would think about, I think under the engineering umbrella. There's software engineering, but you were talking about something else.
Yeah, I want to give a couple websites for them to talk about, to think about, and to look into. So, National Science Foundation has quite a
Mhm.
few job openings. So if you want to do Google search for them, National Science Foundation careers and job openings. National
Mhm.
Science Foundation is looking for new feasible technologies. They're looking for something unique that drives science forward, especially in America. So they have all kinds of jobs involved in that, kind of holy grail search. They're an amazing organization to work for. And then also Blue Origin. So for instance, they're looking for
Yeah.
machinists. And a lot of people think, oh, I have to have this, very specific space degree to work for them. You don't actually. They need a lot of people that would be standard in any sort of operation, like welders and machinists, for instance. So Blue Origin is another good one. And I've never heard anyone that worked for Blue Origin that wasn't excited to do so. So another phenomenal kind of career choice. And then iSpace Incorporated. So iSpace Incorporated has quite a few jobs that are space, but also, kind of run of the mill. And this is going to be true across the board. So I would just encourage anybody out there who's thought about, oh, if I had a genie that get granted wishes, I would work in the space industry, but I don't have the right thing. I would say go looking at all these different space organizations and companies. And I also want to talk about the nonprofit sector and the organizational level, because we look
Yeah.
at the primes, for instance, like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Axiom, and companies like this. They're building the physical things we need to get to space, and that's great. And I encourage anyone to look for work there. But space organizations are kind of the center point of how we interface with the public. And right now, more than ever, this is going to be a huge focus for the government, for Space Force, for others that are kind of pulling the strings in space. We need that messaging to be tight. And that's really, and we'll talk about this more in a minute, but it's really the problem we have and how we created space culture in this country, that the messaging just isn't there with the public. And we need them. We need what, Daniel talks about demand signals quite a bit, and we do need those demand signals from the public. We need to be able to onboard them in a way to where they don't resent every time we have a great day. I want them to have the great day with us. And so those sort of organizations out there, like Multiplanetary Society, Foundation for the Future, Human Space Program, Space for Humanity, there's hundreds or thousands of these organizations, National Space Society. There are roles, volunteer and paid, that would be phenomenal there. So I encourage you to check them out.
I
Yeah,
was just going to say, I was on,
Oh, good. Yeah.
oh, that's okay. I was on SpaceX's website because everyone, thinks SpaceX is cool. I mean, they need carpenters, architects, engineers, even a barista part-time.
Yeah. And then also
Hey, coffee on the
organizations
moon.
like-
You can count me in.
coffee on
Exactly.
the moon.
I mean,
I'll
if
come make
you
coffee at
want to
SpaceX.
get into these jobs, I mean, it's exciting. I mean, you can
Yeah.
go to any of these space companies, just Google jobs with space companies, or even for NASA, if you're a communicator, if you're a former or if you're a television person wanting to get out of the business, that's a reporter. NASA needs public affairs people, usajobs.gov. And not just NASA, that's for all of our government agencies. So if you go on there and you're like looking up NASA, National Space Foundation, NOAA, usajobs.gov is another great place to find government jobs that are in the space company as well. So I think that's why, we say space is for everyone. It really is, because what you do, you can apply it to space just like you can here on Earth.
Exactly.
Well, and I want to break ranks really quick. April, don't kill me, but I want to break a little bit here out of the structure you've given us just for a minute. We have a celebrity in our midst, everybody. Holly Bollinger. Thank you so much for being here today, Holly. I know you didn't plan on talking,
Holly,
but I have to talk to you for a
come off
second.
mute. Hi.
Holly is so inspiring. And we're right here at the same point of talking about making it in space. You kind of carved your own niche out. Could you just take a minute and talk about how you got inspired and how you created your own path in space? Because this, to me, is one of the most inspiring stories.
Thank you, Ainara. So for me, this initially started with can we hear me okay? Is my audio? Okay, good. It started with an application for the Dear Moon Project. I applied, I got accepted, I made it to the third round. That year, I took a trip down to Starbase. Didn't have a clue what I was going to see or what was there, nothing. 2 days turned into 9 days sitting beside the rocket, dancing in the ocean while SN15 came to life. Something changed in me in that very moment. I stood on that sand dune and looking up at a rocket for the very first time, my life changed. I the next event was poolside. That's where I met Anara during the first ever Sally's night. And the connections have just been one right after another since then. I'm a member of the Inspired 24. They are, yes, and I'm so happy to see like so many familiar faces joining in now. And like we've all known each other for a little while, but you know, for me, I'm a photographer, amateur at best, but there's something that's drawing me to SpaceX. I've lived down there. I've relocated twice now, fell through, went back again. My place is 3.8 miles from the launch pad. And yeah, you can't get any closer than that.
That's amazing.
It is incredible. For me, it's just proving to myself that I can do this. I was born with a learning and mental health disability that did hold me back my entire life. Hi, Mama, go away. My pit bull. It did hold me back. Like I was overlooked so much in life, and there was no reason that should have ever happened. I've been to college. I have an education. I'm not dumb, you know, but everybody just society labeled me from the get-go. And I want to make sure that we break that. I don't want the younger generation to continue to go through that. And so I hope by speaking out about my mental health and my learning disability that it'll encourage others to chase after their dreams. I mean, I have no clue where this is all going. I had no clue that I would be doing spacesuit pressurization training this past year. Who does that? I mean, a girl from Oklahoma, who does that kind of stuff?
You are so cool. I have to jump in
I
and
know.
say, I'm
Thank
jealous,
you.
girl. And being an I-24 member too, we have got to meet in person.
Yeah, I mean, I
Continue.
am so excited. I tell you what, I-24 has been great. I went to Biosphere recently and did my training there. We're waiting for our second training to come up, hopefully this spring. And then I'm working on becoming an analog astronaut. So yeah, it's, you know, you can do it if you want to. And that's the thing. I stumble every day. I stumble through this and I just keep getting back up and keep trying. So thank you, Ainara.
Well, when I interview you, we're going to call the article "Stumbling Towards Space" because
Oh, I
just-
love it. I
you're
love it.
you have such perseverance, and I love that. You know, you may not have been given kind of a red carpet, like, "Hey, here's how you get to space." You were just like, "I want this. I'm inspired. I have to have this. I'm going to find a pathway."
Yeah.
So, if anyone, you know, Holly, your story is what I want people to understand, that there are so many pathways out there. And you don't have to wait to find one. You can create one, and you absolutely have. So I see Holly
Yes.
at so many different space events. It's become definitely part of your culture. So I think your story
It
should
is my life.
absolutely. It should show people that, you know, there are so many ways to create space for yourself. So, you know, find it, go after it, don't wait for it, make it, and space can really be for anyone.
And you
And
know,
I see your
my call sign is grit, GRIT, for
So
a
appropriate.
reason. Because I just keep pushing through it. So
Yeah. Well, I know I didn't warn you, but thank you for being willing to jump on and
Thank
be a good
you.
sport. Go ahead, Daniel.
and perseverance, right? I could tell you're a plant person, right? Plant people have to have a lot of perseverance and
Yes,
resilience there.
I'm
So the
actually a
horticulture is
gardener.
there.
I like to self-sustaining lifestyle is what I really want to be able to teach more people about as well. So yeah.
Well, I think that's the perfect segue to jump into our
Yes.
main hour. Daniel, can
Love
we
it.
start with you? I would love to hear more about the Hidden Space program, your pathway. How in the heck did you end up here? And, you know, people don't often think about food in space, but we really should think about it more. I think it should be central because you don't want to starve on orbit.
That's a long story, but
Well, we are
the
here,
story's
so we
actually-
can't wait to hear it.
the story is actually more exciting than the technology. The technology is very plant-based. It's very macro. It's very plant-inspired. It's how do you start with essentially a very small seed, you know, kind of the magic behind plants. And how do you start from a very small seed and end up with a giant sequoia, right? With its resilient, passive nature and everything like that, is how do you develop a whole agricultural system, right? In that, and so it's really born out of a hackerspace in Tampa, Florida, where we're sitting around watching rockets try to land in Florida. and whiteboarding, as you do in maker spaces and hacker spaces, and say, hey, what about this other pathway? There's all these different pathways to the future. And for me, I didn't come from a sci-fi background much at all. And the whole vision of lots of power and lots of robots in space, that was me very agriculturally grounded, rooted. Was okay, but how do like all these ecological services, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat. Biology does so much work for us at the front end and at the back end, right? Our waste processing as well. And those seem to be missing parts, but they look to be uniquely scalable. Um, so as I drove around Florida, doing consulting there and everything, lots of windshield time and watching rocket launches as well. It was a very interesting thought experiment that just kind of stayed with me and almost therapeutic coming from a plant pathologist standpoint where we're dealing with all these new insects and diseases and agricultural industry problems and everything that it was almost therapeutic to think of, oh, what about in space, right? Where we can do things very differently. And also they have very applicable elements to earth-based agriculture. Because really it's just what's the future of agriculture look like through space, through the very tight constraint of space. There's no, I call it greenwashing or gray washing. You can't do any of that in space. It either works or it doesn't. You skip all that tier 3 analysis, environmental impact stuff, and you go straight to, does it work? Does it scale or does it not? So that's kind of the long and short of what I'm interested in. And along the pathway I've met, that's the one great thing about having, I guess, a long meandering pathway is you meet an incredible set of people along the way. And in all different arenas, from nitrogen to waste processing to all these different elements of agriculture and biological sciences and human health ultimately, you run into all these parallel stories and all these other pieces of the puzzle that fit together along the way. So there's a really interesting story kind of developing and work that's being done out there at government agencies and universities and private industry that all kind of aligns together. And I've spoken to this a little bit about kind of the hidden space community. It's people working in all these arenas that have no idea that they're applicable to space. So you're working in water conservation or whatever, food production in all different various schemes. It's like, hey, do you know this is really applicable to space? It's again back to that whole, whether we go into space or not, in 50 years, 100 years, we're going to need the same exact technology, pretty much.
I love
pretty much the
what
same
you're working on.
constraints there.
We have to often justify our existence in the space industry, and I think it can be difficult at times because of the disconnection we have across the board with the public that we're working to repair. We often have to say, instead of saying, space is worthy on its own grounds, we say, environment, like we help the environment. Our satellites help you track climate change, or Velcro or cell phones, or we try to make these kind of cases for like, please love us because we do this other stuff you care about. And I think with your perspective, one thing that shocked me, I didn't get it at first. When we first spoke the first couple of times, I was like, seems kind of like it's a distraction. And then it clicked one day and I went, oh my God, this is pivotal. And it was this dichotomy or this dual kind of perspective of two things. One was there's this hidden space program where people around the world are working on things that they don't realize are critical for that future in space, but also that solving these kind of big things in space is going to solve for Earth in huge ways that we don't even think about. So can you talk about, and also food has to work for us. It can't just feed us. It has to create things as well. Can you talk a little bit more about, how we engineer for space, and then that's applicable to the planet, but also how we connect these two? Because I think that's where the secret sauce is.
Yeah, what you breed or what you bring with you for that initial seed, I think, is a unknown, right? 8 billion people on Earth, and none of them live independent of Earth's natural resources. I joke, maybe there's a guy like in Hong Kong, like slurping algae and has his own like waste processing, like, and he's just totally like in his bubble and like totally disconnected. But we haven't solved for this yet, even in space. So what that hardware looks like and the size and mass, instead of just, okay, we got to bring a whole bunch of this food or water or whatever, what that hardware looks like to do these grand things. Do you bring the food? Do you bring the greenhouses to produce the food? Or do you bring the machine that makes the greenhouses, like out of CO2 and water? That level of analysis is like, which one's the smallest, from a mission relevant need, from a grandiose need. Why is it always 100 years in the future that we're going to do space settlement? No one's tried to really solve it. It's all been very mission and trip related, not staying. We truly haven't tried to stay yet.
Daniel, I think too, a lot of people have seen the movie, the Mars movie, where, oh my God, Matt Damon.
The Martian.
Yes. And that's something right up your alley. I mean, for people that have seen movies like that or think those movies are cool, like, it's not too far off.
Yeah. I think that drove a lot of the interest. Again, a lot of this was like, who's interested in this stuff, and people were like, that was right around the time actually when I started thinking about this concept, the seed for this process, and that was very interesting because it got people to think differently. I think just very abstract things, right? Like the nitrogen from the air turns into fertilizers for plants that turns into the proteins that we eat. Those types of systems engineering and life, food web kind of analysis is often kind of missed. Same thing with CO2 in the air and water. People don't look at a tree and say, oh, that's 98% of that tree is literally just CO2 and water. It's kind of that magic behind creating resources that biology does, and it doesn't have to plug in. That's the cool thing about biology. It does so much work for us, and you don't have to plug it in, and you can change it. There's a level of resilience there and distribution and equity, right? If we can solve these things in a basic but resilient way, it has a massive potential to help folks that are resource limited in extreme environments. It's the same as space.
And what I love is it also gives us, space is giving us an opportunity to rethink a lot of these systems, because, you may think about mining on an asteroid or mining on the moon, for example, but what you don't think about necessarily are the byproducts of that and how those can be used, some of which can be used for biological, right? Like breathing, like O2, right? There's a lot of ways where we can recreate these systems in the next town over to be more efficient, to be more connected, so that as human beings we can, I think, live more synergistically with our environment, particularly in an environment that, again, as somebody mentioned earlier, is trying to kill us. But now we have an opportunity to make it better. Like, that's, I think, again, why space is worthy and why we're all worthy to be a part of it, is to offer us that opportunity.
And rage against entropy, right? Rage against the darkness of the night, rage against entropy. Very much that's what biology does, is it tries to outpace entropy. And you have to grow in order to do that. You have to have a system and a process that keeps expanding, because you're not going to have a perfectly 100% efficient system. You're going to have waste, but how do you utilize that waste? How do you make it, a greater outcome is what biology does really well. And we should have systems that are similar, not as fast. I mean, that's the interesting thing, right? Is biology replicates, right, in terms of hours. I mean, can you imagine a city replicating in terms of hours, right? It's all just many parts, right? Or your food-based system. So, we don't have to replicate that fast. The human population grows at 1.1% right now on Earth. Historically, peaks at like 2 or 3% on an annualized basis. It's not the hardest thing to solve for an expanding population. We just have to expand food, water, housing, building materials, chemical production. We just have to, how do we produce that at a rate that it expands at 1.1%? Not some, from a business standpoint, it's like a horrible model. It's, if you were at a business model that, we're going to grow by 1% this year. I mean, I don't know what industry that is. It's probably not that exciting or lucrative.
And I want to drop a bombshell too. I want to drop a bombshell that shouldn't be a bombshell. Climate change, we lost. It's over. Like, anyone out there who's saying, we have to fix this. No, it's over. Like, we have absolutely lost this battle. And the window of time on Earth where it's habitable is closing pretty quickly here, in the scale of things. So that is the reality, that there is, we should do things to kind of mitigate the damage. But at this point, we're in this race against this change that's coming to where the planet will not be ideal for human beings. And we're kind of already seeing that every single day. And so we do need more independence from those systems. And so when we're building these, building out these solutions for space, we have to start applying them to the planet. We're going to have to live in dome cities on this planet. We're going to have independent water and food and air systems. So, Bill Nye talks about, we shouldn't go to space. It's so difficult. And we have this really nice, cozy planet. No, that's done. The cozy planet time is over. So we have to start looking at like Stephen Hawking's warnings, for instance, of get off the planet or go extinct. But I think we also have get off the planet or go extinct, but also create independent systems on the planet that are more like space systems. And then you can, kind of live here longer. So that is the reality. It's kind of grim, but we do have the potential to change that, to mitigate that by implementing these sort of, really robust and extreme space systems on the planet itself.
And if you really dislike oil and fossil fuels, space doesn't have any. So if we figure out how to develop in space and thrive there, this is, for all the geopolitical and atmospheric and everything else is, if we solve for this, it's actually carbon negative. It's actually, where is the carbon? You go to the moon, carbon and nitrogen are two of your most limited elements. You don't want to create like nitrous oxides. These are things that are never talked about, which I could do whole segments on with people that are working on these challenges. Is how do you close the nitrogen cycle in space? It's something that is at very early stages, but it's critically important. Biosphere 2 had nitrous oxide buildup inside of it. So how do you, and nitrogen's not on the moon. So how do you solve for the nitrogen cycle in a closed loop system so you have healthy air to breathe, so you don't have, you have stasis and you have control, but also it's a resource too, is how do you make things like plastic in a post-oil world, right? There are dialysis cartridges that you're never going to make them out of glass and autoclave them or anything like that. Is in 50 years, 100 years, and the industry is all transitioning to these things. They're looking over the horizon. They're saying, how do we do resilient bioplastics for different biomedical applications in different industries? So that's another part of the hidden space arena, is that there are, industries and groups that are on 30, 50-year development cycles are working on a lot of these challenges. So how do we engage them? And what does that piece of equipment look like? Is it really so big, or does it actually start small? Do maybe some of the biggest ideas could actually be the smallest payloads?
I
That's
think.
what blew me away.
Go ahead,
Oh,
Ubaldo.
sorry, Meredith.
No,
I was
go
just
ahead,
going to
go
say
ahead,
real
go
quick. One thing that always blew me away that I just learned maybe a couple years ago, so the development of certain drugs like insulin, when done in space, produces a much more effective version of that drug, meaning because of the lack of gravity in space, the crystalline structures that make up the foundation of the drug are pure and perfect, and to a point where it's 100% effective, meaning you don't have to take as much. And so, producing things like certain drugs up in space can be much so beneficial for us and our human bodies here on Earth. Speaking to that kind of hidden part of the space industry, like there's so many things like that going on that we don't know about, and it's fascinating and will benefit us.
And I think this goes back to being somebody who has been in the media for the last decade and a half. This stuff needs to get out. I mean, we really need to focus as companies and working with communications liaisons and whatnot to get these stories out there, because we talk so much about bull crap, excuse my French, and there's these stories about a video that goes viral on TikTok of a dog or a bear on its hind legs. I mean, a couple of those stories are good, but we need, all of this impacts us, and I really don't think people are going to understand until it's too late that these are topics and conversations that need to be had now. And we need to get these experts in here and people like ourselves or with other talents and backgrounds to be able to contribute, because I can't tell you how many times that, I get it. The news is to get the news out there, but we hear about stabbings and shootings and the COVID numbers. And I get it. But why can't we shorten segments more and have more stories about things like this that are going to be topics that, if they're not talked about soon, like Inara said, we're going to be in trouble. And I don't know where that starts, but coming from someone who is not just a meteorologist, but a reporter, a journalist, like, I think companies and people with these great ideas need to start reaching out to their local journalists, because network is tough to go straight to the top and say, hey, I have this great story. But if you get into a local station, I can tell you all the local network stations like ABC, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, they start with the local stories that come in, and then they distribute it nationwide. And then other networks pick up those stories. So I think as communities, we should start a conversation about how can we better get these stories into our newscasts, into our radio segments, into our newspapers, and get those facts out there, because that's where everybody goes for their information. I mean, yeah, they go for social media, but if you get something national headlines and attention, I don't know about you, your guys' thoughts are on this, but I think we need to start there and really have stress from these companies to get their PR people and their communication liaisons talking to the media and not be so afraid of, should we share this or not?
I think this is the perfect time to, talk about you, Meredith, and your journey and kind of what you're bringing to the table, because we have the space bubble with lots of space people, with lots of space conferences and lots of space influencers, but then most people aren't in the bubble with us. And really, it's a really hard task to try to recruit them into the cult, as it were, because sometimes it can feel kind of culty. We need to really break into the mainstream more. And you are absolutely a success in the mainstream. And now you're over here with us. Can you talk about your journey? And also, what can we do to make this mainstream? How can we really engage the people who don't typically look up more?
That's great. Well, so my story is interesting because I was 3 years old, and I know you say, hey, when you're a kid, you want to be a ballerina, you want to be an artist. And I wanted to be a meteorologist because my mom, it was simple as her telling me about surviving one of the biggest tornado outbreaks in history in Ohio. For those of you who might be familiar with the super outbreak of 74, April 3rd and 4th. People lost their lives. There was a destruction of tornadoes. And this was back in the 70s when we didn't have advanced warning systems like we do now. We didn't have people out there that could get on the air and give advanced warning, because they were literally getting the information that the tornado was like right down the street. My mom told me this, and I believe everything happens for a reason, and we all have our journey, and God's got a plan for us, or whatever you believe in. Things are laid out, and we have a journey to go on. And the first part of my career journey was being a communicator, a TV meteorologist. And when I started off my career, I didn't just get the Monday through Friday weather segment and all I did was talk about weather. I had to become a reporter and a journalist. And that was probably the best thing that could have happened to me, because I always was a writer. I wrote stories when I was a kid and would get written up in school because I would be sitting there daydreaming and writing stories about how my friends and teachers and I were all doing these adventures. So I knew from the beginning that I had that gift of writing. And we know this. We all have gifts. We all have those special talents. And, all four of us here, we each have our own unique thing that we kick butt at and we're specialty in. And so for me, with my career, I started to report on, different types of stories. I mean, in the beginning, it was awful because I was the meteorologist covering the stabbing, and the cops would laugh and say, "Oh, what's the weather at the crime scene?" kind of thing. But yeah, I know, right? So, but sucking it up and looking back, I'm really thankful that I got more and more opportunities to get out in the community and to get to know community leaders and network. Because in 2017, so I began my TV career in 2008, and in 2017, I was talking to our friends down at the National Weather Service in Oxnard, Los Angeles. I was working at Santa Barbara. I was the morning meteorologist, but I had opportunities to do stories on the side. So I did a lot of science reporting and STEM stories. And one of the meteorologists there reached out and said, hey, our office is going to be part of the pilot program to take the initial data from the first of the GOES-R satellite series, which, if you're not familiar, GOES-R has brand new 5 times the data, much faster, very crisp, and it helps forecasters give us that look of when a storm is coming so we can warn people and save lives much quicker. That can help with our advanced warning. It can help local community leaders and FEMA make decisions to say, hey, we need to evacuate this community because there's a hurricane coming. And I remember when I sat down and I was doing a story on it, I realized there's not a lot of people reporting on space topics. And again, this was in 2017, so this wasn't too long ago, but it was something that I noticed. And then I did that story, and the feedback was crazy. Everybody wanted to know more about it. So then I did another story, and I went out to Vandenberg Space Force Base in Lompoc, which is just north of Santa Barbara. And I did a story on the behind the scenes, how meteorologists contribute to rocket launches. Again, such huge support and feedback from people that said, this is cool. I had no idea this was going on. And that's when I kind of started my nickname Rocket Girl, and people were going with that in the news and the space business, because all of a sudden I was getting asked to go to rocket launches and cover and do these stories. And it was very rare to see people outside of some reporters that had like a space beat or a climate beat. And I kind of realized as a scientist, I was very good at sitting down with engineers or people that talked a lot of their field, and it was very complicated and wordy. But because of my God-given talent, I was able to write a story that your grandmother or your 5-year-old kid could understand and learn something from it and leave them wanting more. So then I started with my following TV stations to become Rocket Girl, to be that reporter that was also a scientist that could communicate these really important space stories. And when I was at Weather Nation, which is a national weather network, very much like Weather Channel and AccuWeather, I started to get on the space beat. And when we were doing Launch America and we were having a lot of these big things happening, I was the person that was going out there, taking these space stories and connecting them to science and weather. And over the years, I've realized there are very few people that really jump in that can do that, having a scientist brain, but also that can properly communicate this in a way that people get engaged and interested. And so that's kind of how I transitioned. I wasn't bitten till the space bug until later in my career. And now here I am 15 years later, and I'm actually going to be taking my career in a different direction. I'm going to focus more on the communication aspects and take my background in television and in the media. And I know that now from working national and local and finding ways to help companies. I mean, I consult on the side and I'll do videos for space companies that are just getting started to help them with the storytelling, help them with, writing press releases and getting that information out there. And I'm hoping that with what I'm doing, I can start more of a revolution of more scientists or people that have the privilege of being in the news or on television and getting these science and space stories communicated. And I know it's going to be taking time. Like we said, nothing is easy and it is hard. I've been to my news directors at several stations in the last 5 years and said, I've got a great space story. And they look at me and say, well, it's good for national, but how can we make this local? And I would get turned down for space stories that were local because they impact all of us. But to try to make my managers and my bosses understand that has been a struggle. And so I feel like the more and more that we do this, the more and more that we get people that are really good scientists, but that also are really good communicators out there to present these topics and get them into the national media and headlines. Like I said, just like climate change. In the beginning, people didn't want to talk about it. Now every meteorologist talks about it. Everybody goes out there. They're doing all these stories. The government's passing stuff. So I know it can be achieved, but I know it's got to be a collaborative effort. And it's going to take people like myself I saw a couple media people that joined this today, which thank you so much, because I shared that and said, hey, media, let's talk more about this. And so my goal is to take this talent and use what I've learned over 15 years and work with private companies and work with government organizations and give them these tools that I can use to help them. Because as we know with anything in life, we've got to help each other out. I mean, yes, there's friendly competition and there's healthy competition, but we don't need to compete to get something moving forward. And if somebody's got a good idea, like Anara and I off this show have been collaborating with our background and our passions and things that we separately are really, really good at, but we know together we can make a difference. And I think it's having these conversations. If it's hearing somebody say, I'm really passionate about this, putting your ego aside and saying, you know what? You could make a difference here. So I'm going to introduce you to this person because it's going to benefit you, but benefit society as a whole. So I know I kind of rambled, but
no, I think you bring up some really good points. And I would love to dig a little bit more into this aspect I didn't see coming. you know, we do understand that we have a problem with the public and getting the messaging out and helping them understand how a space is relevant to their daily lives, which would be the local kind of aspect of this directly impacts you, person, individual. But you're talking about like the people calling the shots behind the scenes in the media with you, and they're like, oh, this is, you know, great national, but it's really not local. They're not getting it. So then I see that we're running into this other kind of wall that I didn't see coming of, you know, I figured, well, the media will get it, but maybe that's the harder battle here of getting those decision makers to realize that it's relevant. And that goes back to what Daniel Tompkins talks about quite a bit of demand signals. If we get the public hungry and chanting and demanding these sort of things, then that will change those industries. So can you tell us a little bit about what could we do on the public side? How can people send those demand signals to get that kind of change happening behind the scenes so that we do get access to more of these stories in the mainstream?
I mean, it's all about networking, right? Like anything in life, not being afraid to reach out to a local media person that you know, or if you have a friend that's a friend of somebody. I mean, hey, I'm here. So you can reach out to me and I'll see the best that I can do, but it can't just be me. I mean, it's got to be other people in local networks, whether it's in small town Kansas or big city New York City. It's talking to people that are on your communication teams at your company. So SpaceX's communication people or small companies that are just getting started, going to conferences and having conversations and saying, okay, how can we present this to the public? Or how can we get this to our local station to say, hey, this is impacting us local? Because that's the problem with pitches. And I can tell you in local news, it's national headlines. It's unless something's really, really big and it's breaking and and that's sad to say, and I know it. And it breaks my heart that that is what gets the attention of national media. It's got to start with our local community stations. And if you've got an astronaut from a small town in Oklahoma that made a difference and they've got an anniversary coming up or they have an event, going to them and saying, hey, we need to get this to our local media station. And it goes back to what I said earlier, that if it's a big enough local story and it gets the traffic on social media and it gets the public interest, then the national networks pick it up and then they share it with all of their stations. And then everybody copies off of everybody. We know this. This is how it's been with facts. Everybody wants to be first. Everybody wants to have that breaking headline. So if you get people copying, and next thing you know, ABC News is using that story on CBS News, is using that story on, you know, MSNBC, you know, it's got to be more trying and getting these stories out there. But the thought process too is if you're getting a local story that you're presenting, you have to think of how it can impact people in the community, because that is what's going to get the news directors. That's going to get the assignment editors. That's going to come across it as a meeting, because all these stations are struggling to survive too. You have to think about that. There's a lot of cuts in media and a lot of small market stations are shutting down and they're using regional stations to tell the news. And it's heartbreaking, but that's the reality of things. And so it's thinking of if everyone is so focused on hyper local, which many local stations are, just trying to stay alive in their communities and be able to stay on DirecTV, we need to think of ways to pitch this that says, here's the local connection, but also knowing it's a national story too. And if one local station does it, another one's going to pick it up and think, okay, how does this relate to my community? If that makes sense.
Absolutely. So we have a quick question from Holly. Go ahead, Holly.
Well,
And we will be taking more questions at the end as well.
kind of on that line. So Wiley Post, he flew out of my hometown airport, the first spacesuit, the first flight. And that happened 3 miles from my house here in Oklahoma. And so that's something that's relevant to this town, but also, to history and what's happening right now in the space industry. So that's something I've been trying to get our local community with our after school programs, getting them to get more involved with this stuff. So
maybe Holly and Meredith, if you can connect afterwards, maybe you could help her with that. Because that sounds like a local news story right there.
Right.
That sounds like a great local news story. And it sounds like something where when you pitch it, yes, it's local, but you could also say, hey, for your affiliates across the entire country, let's talk of the headlines of spacesuits, or see if there's something else there. If they know somebody that they worked with that maybe is from a different community. I mean, I know it's a little bit of extra work, but right now we are fighting against headlines. Like I said, bear goes through garbage and that goes viral. I mean, yeah, there's a place for viral stuff, but if we are privileged to have companies in media that are broadcasting stuff, not just on air now, but all across the internet. And they are well-known, respected TV stations in these countries. We have, or in cities, we need to get them this information so they can use the power that they have to get that information out so it can start to spread.
Well, and I will share a little bit of inside information. We've been working on a space social media site for about 7 years now, and that should go live in about 2 years. And so we're going to be rolling out some basics of that this year, and part of that will be maps, several maps of like space events, space facilities, those sorts of things. So I think we can probably have a segment in there for like local stories and material for media people.
I love that.
Ubaldo, you came into the space industry late as well, and you came from a different background. Can I hear more about like the medical aspect, the building aspect, and kind of how you got the space bug?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, the space bug was early. I mean, yeah, I remember I was a big 80s TV kid, TV and movies. And so I don't know if anybody remembers the miniseries V, you know, where the lizard aliens came down. But like
We
I
come
grew
in
up on
peace always.
right? Like I grew up on V. I grew up on Knight Rider. I grew up on Battlestar Galactica, the original. I grew up on Buck Rogers. That I grew up on that. I mean, I wasn't quite Jim Carrey's The Cable Guy, but I'm pretty close. And then I got hooked on Star Trek. In fact, I think I can't remember if it was Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, and one of the Star Wars movies came out at the same time, Star Wars sequels. And I had to make a choice at the movie theater, and I picked Star Trek. Like that was my defining moment in terms of my
Oh
Trek
no, shots
fandom.
fired in that great
I
war.
know, 100%.
We lost half the audience.
Yeah, exactly. No, please love it. We're all one. But so that's like I've always been this sci-fi nerd, since I can remember, and so for me, then again, the space bug in terms of the industry and being able to work as a part of it never seemed like a reality to me until only a couple of years ago. So the path I took was more in kind of the sales and marketing communication aspect of technology companies. And then I got the entrepreneurship bug. And so started my own company with some co-founders back in 2016. The year I turned 40, I was tired of working for just these jerks who only care about money and were just using us. I was like, no, I'm going to go do my own thing. And so we started this company that has now become a company called IIA Healthcare. And that's where the medical piece of this comes in. We're part of my background. Well, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. Let me go back a little bit. So entrepreneurship, really doing my own thing has sort of always been there. And telling stories has always been there. I mean, I remember doing podcasts before they were podcasts. Like we were recording audio interviews with technology leaders here in Colorado. I'm go back and forth between Colorado and Michigan, but in Colorado for the Colorado Technology Association, and we would sit down and do interviews. And we're talking 2009, 2010. And so, I really loved sitting down. That was sort of my version of reading. I mean, I love to read, but I learned so much more by talking to a bunch of different people and hearing their stories and learning about them. And so doing those podcasts, and this has always been a part of my blood. And so I carried that into becoming my own boss, becoming my own, owning my own company, starting my own company with a great team of people and co-founders, and really charting my own course. And I think a lot of, that's been my path is charting my own course. And I think that's what paved the way to getting to where I am right now. Real quick, IIA Healthcare, I still work with this company because I believe in it, because based on a workplace violence incident that I was a part of back at the end of 2009, a workplace shooting, it became really apparent to me that we shouldn't be afraid to go to work. I mean, we spend half our lives at work. Why? We should not ever fear that. And so one of my big goals is to really help people find a place where they feel safe and they feel included and they feel like they can be themselves, whoever they are, whatever that means, at work. And so IA Healthcare is an interview platform, and we want to make sure that healthcare organizations can hire better so that they're hiring the right people for their team that fit their DNA, that fit their mission and vision and values. But it's a platform that can apply everywhere. And I want space companies to find the right people for their organizations. You know, every company is different. And unless we lean in on that and own that, then we're just hiring to fill seats, and that just causes problems down the road. You know, our innovation isn't as good, our products aren't as good. And we just end up spending way too much time and money on losing important talent. So all that to say is, you know, like Holly, right? Like she's going for it. Like that's her passion, that's her dream. And I feel like all of us should have that, whatever it is. If you want to get into healthcare, if you want to get into space, if you want to get into technology, but you got to figure out, you know, you've got to find the companies where you're going to shine. And to tie it all back to what we're talking about, you know, it's there's so many different pathways to get to this industry, as a lot of us here have talked about today. And space is a place where you can use your current skill set and your current personality in such a great way, and in such a way that is truly impactful to humanity. Because I've never been in an industry like space where everyone at a conference, for example, is there for the same exact reason. You know what I mean? And you know, Meredith made the point about competition. It's not the same as like the tech industry. You know, we're all working together. We can all work together, even if you've got a few different rocket companies. They're all working together for the same thing, and that's to make access to space for all of us that much more accessible and frequent. And so, you know, that's I think what I've figured out is how can I use my journey? How can I use my influence, my power, my voice, much to what Meredith was alluding to about her, to give voice to other people, to, you know, get out of a place where they don't feel safe, they don't feel included, and find that in the space industry to start.
And I want to highlight that that's pretty profound. That a lot your whole story is, but that part talking about the cooperative versus, you know, collaborative versus competing. In the traditional industry, you can slit your opponent's throat and prosper. You can take out the competition, and you can rise, and the market is robust in that sense. But when it comes to space, you know, this is one of the reasons I'm so drawn to Tim's vision and Foundation for the Future, is that we have no infrastructure in space. There is no such thing as a space organization or a space company, when we really get down to it, that is real in space at the moment. So we have to build that infrastructure, which is part of what the Space Act from Foundation for the Future is endeavoring to do, is to lay the groundwork for everything else that comes later. Because we don't have that infrastructure, you can't compete. You can't slit your opponent's throat, because they might be providing something critical for you, like your oxygen, for instance. And so I think it does tend to have this learning curve for people who come from other industries. They come in with this like entrepreneurial, competitive, you know, pro-market kind of stance, which is great. But then they have to realize, oh, I have to collaborate. I get to collaborate across this wide spectrum. And you can see that, like, you know, if you've read the story of light bulbs and the major 6 light bulb companies that created a broad collaborative platform so they could, you know, kind of keep the market running for themselves, or Google and Meta meeting in Colorado to talk about some broad agreements, like they're getting it. And our industry is getting it in a big way as well. And so I think there is that spirit of cooperation. And I see people who are extremely passionate, who come from very successful backgrounds in industries like government, intelligence, oil, automotive, energy, all these kind of, they're the royalty of capitalism, and they will take a cut in their lifestyle to come play in space. And I think it's 2 big reasons. One is that they see the writing on the wall. Just like everyone should have had an internet strategy at one point, and we did an AI strategy. If you don't have a space strategy, no matter what industry you're in, then you're going to be left behind. And people are getting that. I mean, even with Prada, for instance, doing the interior for Axiom, and Adidas, fitting out the astronauts. And I could name all kinds of luxury brands. Cartier is getting in on the game, liquor distributors. People are getting it. They realize that space is coming full fast at us. And so they want to play. But also, there's something truly inspiring about this industry and the potentials that we can achieve. I think as humans, our greatest potential is evolution, is evolving ourselves, is going beyond the boundaries. So we see people coming in. And I think that cooperation is just the bedrock to making all this possible. We're mission oriented. And you have a company called Space Builders, right?
Yeah, and it's more like it's a company, but it's more of a concept. And I think I've been letting it sort of figure out what it wanted to be when it grows up. And I think, but to me, it's I think all of us are space builders, in the sense that whether you're an entertainer, whether you're a journalist, whether you're an analog astronaut, whether you're an artist, whether you're a bartender, I mean, we're all building towards space in our own way. And so that's what I want Space Builders to represent, is all of us and all of our voices. So how do we capture that? How do we put a huge megaphone on the earth and enhance and amplify all of those voices? Because again, none of this works unless all of us are part of the conversation. And again, it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what your background is. We all need to be a part of that. And so that, to me, is what I want Space Builders to be, is sort of a way to capture all of our voices. So I don't know what it's going to become. I think we're all working together on figuring that out. And but I do want it to represent all of us, and we're all space builders. All the companies working on this stuff are space builders. The children who are going to be working in space, by the way, in the next 20 plus years. We really we're losing out on the opportunity. The gap is closing on ensuring that the younger generation are prepared for that, because those opportunities are coming a lot faster than people think. And so how do we ensure that we have people who that'll be their day job, going up into a space station, working and coming home, right? So you have dinner. That's what it's going to be. And so we all need to come together to build space together, to your point, Inara, because there really isn't a structure there to truly guide us. So we've got to all build it. And we have to.
Hey, before we go to the Q&A too, I want to hear Inara's story, because all three of us want to
Absolutely.
accept you. And I know we're getting close to 15 minutes left. And Inara, you definitely deserve time to tell your story. I know. Yeah, time flies when you're having fun, right?
Yeah, it's been my experience over the years on various shows that you get the original slots and you're like, oh, how are we going to fill so much time? And then you end up like, oh God, we're going over. It's just the way it goes. And I love these organic shows because we can really just dig in and have these personal moments. I got in very untraditionally. I can't say that I'm new to space. I've been involved in space since I was a teenager, and professionally for over 17 years now. But I didn't originally think it was possible. I didn't even know it was a possibility. And I grew up in a very small town in foster homes. I went through 12 different foster homes, and my small town felt like an enclosed prison to me. I didn't, I knew analytically that there were other places out in the world, but to me, it felt like they were inaccessible, that I would be stuck in this small town my entire life. And, being outed as gay at 16, and, that was not a good time. I was threatened by parents and teachers and students with death threats. And I was made to understand I didn't belong there, that there was no place for me. And so in my mind, I was thinking, well, I can't leave this town, but I have no place here. And I just couldn't reconcile this. And I just felt despair. And I remember going to this little bookstore run by some nuns, and they had a box of National Geographics. I was an avid reader. Reading was my thing. And this box of National Geographics was every magazine from 1960 to 1993. And this was a magic portal. It literally gave me this understanding of astronauts and dinosaurs and African tribes and the RLC, and just, it blew my mind, because I realized, oh my God, this town is nothing. This is just one little tiny blip, and there's all this stuff out there. And I want this. I want this for myself. And I didn't really think, I got inspired and it kind of got me out of my funk and it opened my eyes to the wider world. But then it was almost like giving a drop of water to someone in the desert. You're like, well, that's not enough. I need more. Like, how do I make this real? And I also got a book called The High Frontier by Gerard K. O'Neill. And I went, wait, what? We can live in space? There's this thing out, we can do this. And I was hungry. I was so hungry. So then I interlibrary loaned, for those of you in this generation, we had like 20 books in our local library. So I interlibrary loaned everything I could get on space and just devoured it. And then at 18, I was put on the side of the road. Literally, they put me outside the CPS office with a trash bag full of clothes and said, you're an adult, this is on you. And I had no job. I hadn't finished my education. I had no money, didn't have a driver's license, didn't know any of my birth family. And so I had no options. And I ended up homeless and on the streets and sleeping on couches and just trying to figure life out. And after a couple of years of thinking, well, I have nothing to do anything. I can't do anything great because I don't have an education. I don't have parents. I don't have support, whatever. I had these little voices in my head. I snapped out of it one day and I realized I have skills to leverage. I've been through 12 homes. Every home I had to adapt very quickly to different religions, cultures, norms, structures, and I was able to do that. And I was a great communicator. So I took those skills and I started at the very beginning of, kind of social media. I was able to build these massive groups for the Jovian Society, which doesn't exist anymore. But back in the day, any group over 1 million members, we ran that if it was space oriented. So I was able to build this huge following. We had 35 different groups. A lot of them were over 3 or 4 million. And I was able to go to space companies and say, oh, you're doing this great thing, but nobody knows about it. I'd love to help blow this up and I'll do it for free. And of course, when they heard free, they were like, oh, and social media was so new, they really couldn't figure out how this thing worked. So they would throw me things and I would build these relationships. And that got me at the table with people from like Harvard and PhDs and, space industry insiders. And I started growing this massive network. And I always had 2 things I would ask them. I would say, I want 2 things in return. One is if you go to space before me, you take me with you and we have a coffee on the moon, And the serious one was if I ask for a meeting with you with somebody else, you take the meeting. You don't have to give them what they want, but you take the meeting. And that became more powerful as I was able to leverage more, vetted and larger contacts than people just, if I called, if I emailed, they open their doors, they open their networks. And over the last 17 years, I built this powerful space network. And then, after, kind of climbing that mountain, I realized after I was pretty well situated in this industry and I was pretty well known, I realized we have a problem with messaging. And that goes back to the Apollo era. We had this national myth we created. We needed to, and we were very successful, and astronauts had to be gods. So we posed them in front of Corvettes and we told the rocket stories and, we kind of highlighted this larger than life goddom of astronauts, and the whole nation started dreaming with us. People planned their lives around these launches. And it was the national buzz. And, it was this whole national defense strategy of we have to get there before the Russians, the Cold War. So we created this myth and it was very successful. But then what happened was that myth aged poorly. And we came to the modern era where people don't want to worship gods. They want an equal setting at the table. They want equality, equity. They want accessibility. And so as the culture shifted, the messaging didn't. And that's where the space industry got left behind. But also during this, national defense era with DARPA and NASA, who were created simultaneously, the whole thing was don't talk to the public. You don't speak to the public. This is national defense. You can go to prison. These are national secrets. So we have people that will curate the message. We have people that will do that. You keep your head down, get your job done. And so pretty much everybody in the space industry, bar those few messengers, they weren't allowed to talk to the public. And then when we had legacy companies like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, they took those same kind of mentalities with them of it went from you can't talk to the public to you don't really need to. You've got government contracts. Why even engage with the public? They're kind of irrelevant. And so this created a really toxic kind of messaging culture that has bit us in the butt, really. And then we go to SpaceX and Blue Origin Axiom, this next phase where it's more the private space industry. And they do understand the importance of talking to the public, but they really don't understand how that structure needs to work. And so we had like rocket launches with SpaceX and the explosions, and we kind of got the rocket bro culture, and we've started breaking open that connection to the public, but we haven't quite mastered it. And so what I started doing was looking at people who had gotten it right. And when I was talking about the great things happening in space, people would literally say, people who love me and who support me, and strangers would say, why are you doing this thing in space? You're wasting money. Like, why don't you go fix ethnic conflict or ecological distress or, any of these big things that matter. But then on Hollywood side, $600 billion a year, and no one ever asks Hollywood to fix these problems. They never ask their plumber why they're not the carpenter. But we're getting this kind of thing. And I'm like, well, what's so different about us? But Hollywood was getting questions like, when's the next season I can binge? And I realized like they've got some sort of connection with the public we need to get. And I examine things like fashion, luxury brands, music, booze, movies, and I call these the established religions of society. These are the things that are bedrock, that are not questioned, that people just, sports, that people just accept. And so my key was, let's take space and drop it into those established religions. Let's be the spice in the soup. And then it's not us, trying to convince people that we're important. It's like, here we are in this thing you already care about. And so if we're in Hollywood, if we're in sports, if we're in fashion, then you really can't ask us why we exist and why we're not doing these things we're not made to do unless you do it with these established religions. And so it was a little sneaky trick to kind of get the messaging out. And that's been working, it's been working, especially on the Hollywood side. But we need a better way now that we are kind of breaking through, we need a better way of opening this bubble up and engaging the public and kind of breaking down those old myth structures.
Such a good point. I think it ties together everything the four of us were talking about within the last hour. And that's why we're doing a show like this, is we care, we're passionate, and we have this opportunity, this privilege to have something like this through Foundation for the Future, where we can get these important topics out there and we can hear what you want to hear. And we can, like we said, we can myth bust or we can get the facts out there. But that's the thing, is it's like more people need to have conversations like we do. And that's why we really hope everyone who's watching now or hearing about this, you'll join us every month, because I think, we've got I'm the timekeeper, I swear, keeping us on track, but we've got a great show we're planning for February.
Before we go off to the next show, I want to say one last thing about the wrong stuff, right stuff dichotomy. We were taught about the right stuff, and that was the idea of these superhuman gods. But now we want to talk about the wrong stuff, and the wrong stuff is the right stuff, and the wrong stuff is everything else. And we are all the wrong stuff, which is the right stuff. We're all these other pieces to the puzzle that were considered not elite enough, but this is the critical stuff, the foundational stuff that we need, like welders in space, for instance. Tim highlights welders in space all the time, and I think it's really important because that's really, all of that was there all along. It wasn't like we suddenly went, oh, we'll make a bunch of new jobs. It was literally, they were there all the time making these things happen for these astronauts. And I think we need to highlight that there is a continuity from the Apollo era of welders in space. And you can be a welder in space today, and you're part of that continuing legacy.
Justin just commented on your thing, Inara, and he's one of our people on here, and he's saying that they weren't gods. They're human beings. They're heroes. And I don't know if we want to have Justin comment a little more about that, or if we want to comment on that. But I mean, that is a good point to have somebody come back on that. Justin, do you want to chat a little bit?
Well, I will say, I will say they weren't gods. We portrayed them as gods. We made them larger than life. And that was the thing, is we made them larger than life specifically to get people dreaming with us. And that was the right messaging at the time. It fit for what we were trying to achieve. And so the problem is that the myth that worked in the 1960s and 70s doesn't work today. And so we do need different myths. And our heroes aren't these elite, larger than life figures. They're people like the welders in space, for instance.
Yeah, I would just be careful about throwing the word God around. Yeah, it's a very powerful word. It's meaningful to billions of people on Earth. I'm actually working on putting more religion in space, and so you just have to be careful about that.
I don't have to be careful. Yeah, so I'll push back a bit. Like, that's fine. I'm all about if you've got a religious path in your life. I don't, and I'm not worried about using that word, so I'll continue using it.
All right.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Justin.
No, I just it's one of the things I'm working on right now is building something meaningful in space for God. I think is probably something that is righteous and something that's going to bring people together, and it will be meaningful to billions of people on Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, do your thing, but I won't have my language policed. So I'll be pretty strict in this moment of like, use your language, I'll use mine, but that's definitely not my pathway. I'm here for space.
Yeah, and I think my perspective on this aligns with Inara in that, again, we kind of perpetuated this idea, and NASA I think NASA and it still does it to some sense in terms of their astronaut selection. You know, it's still kind of under that right stuff umbrella in terms of, oh my, you know, like you need to be this, and this, and that's it, right? Like it's not, they haven't necessarily opened up the application process to lots of different people. Like the European Space Agency has opened it up to people with certain disabilities, right? And so, again, you know, the problem with concepts of religion and God and things like that is that they get applied to humans in a way that takes us on a path that isn't relevant, to an art's point, isn't relevant now. But we truly did look at the right stuff. Those people, those initial people, you know, a lot of people treated them as gods, and that's unattainable. That's the
Can
point,
I comment?
right?
Because I believe
Yeah.
in God, and I truly, I'm not afraid to say that. And again, that's the nice thing about the show is we can all have our different perspectives.
Totally.
I think what Inara was trying to say, because I'm very much about religion and using the Lord's name in the right way. But I do think to clarify, and I'm hoping Inara will agree with me on this, like in the Bible, people looked up to fake gods and idol stuff. And I think that's the whole point of this. It's not using the Lord's name in vain or saying anything like
No,
that.
I'm sorry, but I think
Being
this is so off
respectful.
topic. Like, I'm sorry, but you know, there are plenty of people who believe in God, plenty who don't, and I just think it's so off topic. Like, it's really encroaching on the whole thing we're doing here. This is not a religious service. There
Sure.
are going to be people here from all different kinds of religious backgrounds, and I can't pull punches on this one. This is not a religious service. We're not here talking about spirituality. We're here talking about the space industry. And while
Right.
there might be room for you, Justin, to have, you know, to kind of bring God and religion into that, that's not what we're here to do. And that's not the topic for today. So, you know, I don't
Right.
like having my language policed. And really, if you're going to come into a space and science, you know, kind of based space and start policing people's, you know, language based on your religious beliefs, you're not going to get very far. I'm just going to be really honest with you. And I will say, we absolutely treated them like gods. 100% we worship these
Yeah.
Apollo astronauts, and people still do today to this
Yeah.
point. I mean, NASA, often people don't even realize that the state of NASA's mission today or the way that it works, and they'll still harken back to the Apollo era in understanding NASA, and they're completely off base because
Right.
it has
Yeah.
shifted. But yeah, like we treated them like gods, and that just doesn't work anymore. We don't want to worship gods anymore. We, in
Yeah.
a sense of
think-
people, we want to have access equally.
And I
Yeah.
think to your point, Inara, the whole direction we're going with this, which I agree, is we want to say it's not just the astronauts that are the highlight of the space business.
That's
Like you
right. That's
said,
right.
there are the builders, there are the carpenters, there are the communicators, there are the scientists. We want everybody to be celebrated. And again, going into the news, we have a great story on an astronaut. That's awesome. But why can't we have a great story on the engineer that developed something on the rover that went to Mars? I mean, we need to start putting people on even playing fields for their accomplishments and their talents versus what happened in the past, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we need to adjust our requirements for who we want to come into the space industry. And I think, again, that's what we're saying. That's what Inara is saying, is the wrong stuff is now the right stuff. And that's the whole point of this part of the conversation, is that everybody on Earth, again, doesn't matter who you are, your background, whatever, you're welcome. And we want to find ways for everyone to participate, not only in the conversation, but in space in general, because
Right.
it's going to take all of us to do that. And so at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. We're here to mainstream the conversation of space. And we're here to make sure that everyone on this planet is aware of what's going on. Awareness is half the battle. As soon as you
Right.
know, then you get a chance to make your own decision, much like Holly has done, right? You get a chance to make your own decisions on who you want to be, and whether that's in the space industry or not, that's up to you. But we just want to make sure that you have all the information, because we don't believe it's out there right now.
Absolutely. So I think it's a good time to open it up to interactions with the audience. If you have questions or comments or want to engage with us, go ahead and open up your mics, raise your hand. We'd love to talk to the audience. And April, do we have anything on socials, any questions from people on socials? And if you can hear me, April, you are muted.
So she just said not right now in the chat. So,
Okay.
which is okay because I know a lot of people maybe have to run to a lunch or stuff. And so the thing is, if you're watching this the second time, just know that you can comment on this. You can send messages to us, and it could come up in the next episode, which by the way is in February, which we're really excited about too. So in addition to opening the floor before we wrap up, we will give you some more details about what's going to be on our February episode.
Absolutely.
So-
Yeah. So I think we can definitely say that we've got some people from Space Force and NASA coming up either February or March. So we're really excited about that. We'll be updating as we get that locked in place.
And
Plus,
John
we want to have. Oh, go ahead,
Thompson.
Evalda.
I was
No,
just
go
saying,
ahead.
John Thompson says, imagine being put in one vehicle and figuring out how to get the vehicle to the next gas station. Exactly right. That's one of the biggest problems is fuel and power. Like, how do we get from here to the moon? How do we get from here to Mars? How do we get from here just to
Right.
lower Earth orbit? So those are the kinds of things that there are so many people working on. And to Merida's point, we got to highlight those people because it's incredible. I mean, we're talking about things like metal propellant and power propulsion units, and it's like thrusters, like you see on your favorite spaceship on your favorite sci-fi show. They have thrusters, they have engines, right? We're working on those things. There's a good friend of ours who's actually working to build warp drive. If you're a Trekkie,
I'm actually the marketing director for ZC. So yeah, we're the only game in town right now. I mean, it was Alcubierra and Sunny White, but now ZC Institute is working on solving warp bubbles, which will lead to eventually to warp drive and to limitless energy. And one of our scientists just got $285,000 from the National Science Foundation. So the money's great, but also that's a sense of vetting. If they're giving us money, then there's something real going on behind the scenes. So it's exciting where we're coming to this age where I think people they've kind of been left behind in the messaging and we're catching them up, but there's going to be this huge moment of like, wait, what? All this is real? We're looking at, Star Trek is going to be pretty outdated pretty quick. It won't really be that futuristic pretty soon, which is the goal.
Well, and I think the power of Star Trek, and I don't know if this is a good point to end or not, but I think what we're all trying to build to today has been influenced in many ways by the philosophy of like a Star Trek, or some of our other just beloved sci-fi franchises, because it's what is it? Infinite possibility. What is can never remember
infinite
it.
diversity and infinite combinations. If you
right.
don't know,
That's
part
it.
of my
Nice
day
one,
job,
Anar. Nice one.
for the last 5 years, part of my day job has been working with the Star Trek actors, Orville actors, Battlestar Galactica, Hulu, Disney, Paramount, Seth MacFarlane. So that's kind of been my bread and butter. I'm literally this week working on a transition program. I have a couple more things left to do in that vein that are pretty big, and then I'm going to go right back to space and kind of be done with all the Hollywood work, because it's in good hands now with people like Amy Emhoff, for instance, who came over. She was Kate Mulgrew's social media handler, and she's just a phenomenal mind, and she's got so much passion, especially for making space for women in the Hollywood industry, but also in space. So she's got it well in hand of connecting Hollywood and space. And I'm like, okay, job done. I can go back to space now, because Hollywood's great, but it's just so much work.
Yeah.
And I want to add too, because now it's funny that this didn't come to me for the last couple of hours. I'm a freelance writer for space.com, which shares a lot of these space stories. So it may not get to the local news, but maybe it starts with, if you have a press release, like Anar, that story you're telling me about, if you've got people with these great stories and there's press releases out there, I can pitch these stories. I have, I can see if they're interested in it, and maybe it starts with there, and then we continue to work up from that. But again, if we don't share these stories, if we don't say, hey, let's take a chance and see if somebody's going to pick this up, like I could pitch stories and be turned down, but at least I pitch them.
Yeah.
And it's going to be pitching more of these stories and getting more of these things out there. So let's work together. Let's get this stuff out there. And what we're doing on the show is so exciting. And I know it's 1:06 right now and we're wrapping things up, but I don't know, Inara, should we talk a little bit about our big topic we want people to comment on for our February issue?
Please, absolutely. This is where Liftoff is bringing you the cutting edge. So go ahead, Meredith.
Well, what we're going to be doing is every month we are going to have something kind of called the Rocket Girl Report, because as we know, I have done reporting in the past for my career, but we're going to have a topic that we come up with as a team every month that's, kind of what's going on that month or a big topic in the space community. And we want you to be our reporters from the field and kind of comment on your topic in a minute or less. And we can actually post below the link of where you can upload your video, and you might get selected. But our question with that Valentine's Day in February and the show airing around that is sex in space. What do you think the biggest challenges would be? I know it's an interesting topic, and we're all excited because it is a topic that we've seen people coming out more and more about. And we're actually going to have an expert on our show to go through some of your submissions and kind of set some facts straight and things that you may not have known about that, because that is a question. If we have habitats in space, is there going to be reproduction possible, or what will the challenges be?
Well, and just talking also about, you know, how we talked about Daniel's work and how if we have food in space, if we can't produce food in space, we can't really produce a long-term civilization there. Sex and reproduction, if we can't create humans in space, we really can't have a space civilization, because we can't be importing people at all times. Eventually, we're going to reach kind of critical mass of who's willing to come to space, and then it's like, let's not run out of people. So I love that we're hitting this topic. I also think, you know, people expect us to have this like white lab coat culture in space, and we do. We cover a lot of these sort of normal everyday things that we all have to deal with. So it's going to be exciting. I can't wait for your segment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
But
think
we're
it's going to be great.
Well, we're human, and we got to remember that. Like,
Right.
we take our humanity wherever we go, and that means sex, that means drugs, that means alcohol, that means all of it, right? So we
Did you just summon Chris
talk
Carberry?
a lot about that.
Anytime someone says booze in space, I just know Chris Carberry is somewhere around here.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like this is a topic that's actually been brought up through Foundation before, like maybe 2 years ago. And it seems like I remember Rebecca talking a little bit about it. She wrote a paper on it, I believe. Anyway, sorry.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So the person, do you want to announce who you're bringing on, Meredith? Or do you
Sure.
wanna
Let me
keep- or
just
you want to
make
keep it a secret?
Oh no, let's keep it a secret. Actually,
Okay,
yeah.
let's keep it-
Yeah,
because-
let's do it.
But
Let's do
in
it.
the week leading up to it, I will tell you the week leading up
Yeah.
to our official, which I have the date. Hold on, the air date of this is going to be April. Help me, I believe it is. Is it the 13th?
show.
20
It's February 13th. Is our next show?
Is that right?
Yay!
Just in
All right, my
time.
memory is not failing me.
Yeah.
Put
Survey
it in your
says.
calendars now, same time, same place, February 13th. And in the days leading up to it, we will announce our special guest, like we announce our special guests. But we need you all across the country and the world to go to the link April's going to post, record horizontal, not vertical, horizontal, a minute or less with your reaction to that question that we just posed. And it's exciting. You might see yourself featured on our show next month. Little clips. We're not going to take everybody's, but I'm going to go through it with the team, and we're going to pick some of the top, very interesting topics, and then have our expert go through them and have her reactions. It's going to be so fun, guys.
Fantastic. So I think that's pretty much it for today. Engage with us on socials. I'm the Galaxis Gal. You can find me across socials. Go to our website. It's F4F, so F number 4F space.org. Check out Foundation for the Future and the mission that Foundation for the Future is pushing forward. If you don't know, one of the bread and butter pieces of that is that we're creating a public-private partnership to create the infrastructure in space, and this is critical for the future. So check out the organization as well. And then you want to share your socials as well, everybody?
Sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Jinx,
Ooh,
Ubaldo.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Right? That was good. That was so good.
Where's the Coke?
Yeah, I'll do it. It's I'm going to put it in the chat here because my Twitter is kind of funny, but I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. It's UB3, but it's spelled funny. And then I also shared my LinkedIn as well. But yeah, let's connect on the X, as it's now called, I suppose, and
Yeah.
YOOBEETHREE. And I also need help. I'm jealous of Meredith and Inara and their space names, so I need maybe the community can help me with my name.
Recommend a space superhero name for Ubaldo.
We have
Yes.
to.
We need it. Maybe we'll have a contest. Maybe if we'll pick the
Ooh.
winner and you'll get a Foundation for the Future t-shirt
Yes.
or hoodie. So
Yeah, that would
let's get
be-
that rolling.
My
Love
it.
space name is Spakina.
Ooh, I
That's
love
cute. I
it.
like that.
Fakina.
It's
Yeah, I have,
sassy. I like it.
yeah.
So I
really.
just dropped mine in there real quick. It's my last name and then WX for weather. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or X. It's that on all of them, as well as on LinkedIn. And yeah, I believe Daniel is Mars.
Grow Mars. Grow Mars.
Grow Mars.
At Grow
He's
Mars. Yeah.
yes. So please follow us, connect with us, and share that you joined us today. We want to try to get this out to as many people as possible, and we want to get those important topics because yes, we have topics, we have questions we want to put out there, but most importantly, we want to know what you think because what you may be wondering, a lot of other people might be wondering too, and then we can use that as a great platform to get that conversation started for our future conversations for the future.
And we will be taking the show on the road, so we're going to have segments at live conferences. And there will be an opportunity as we build this out to join the ground crew, which is going to be a support crew. You'll get to have access to behind the scenes, Zoom conferences, things that won't be on the regular show. So look for that in the coming months, the ground crew opportunities we'll be producing.
Yay.
Awesome. Thank you to April and Tim and Foundation for the Future. They're producing this amazing opportunity for us. And so thank you to both of you. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. We're really excited at what's coming this year. I think 2024 is going to be a huge year for space. So thanks for
Without
joining us.
April, we literally would not make it here
Yeah.
on time. We
That's
wouldn't
right.
be organized. We wouldn't have a clue when our segments were.
Yes.
Yeah, April is literally the backbone. Like, honestly, I think it's really common in any of these communication industries where people on the screen are brilliant in their own ways, but so disorganized. So it's amazing to have a producer behind the scenes. April, you are what makes the show work.
Amazing.
And I want to add one more thing too. I know sometimes there are going to be topics that are controversial or there's topics that may be uncomfortable for people, but you know, the whole thing about here is just being ourselves, being out there, being open, sharing our opinions. I mean, you know, we're not going to go and bash people or, you know, gang up on people, but we want to get out there what we want to get out there. And we want to be our own people doing it too. So don't feel like if there's a topic you hear and you're like, oh, it makes me uncomfortable. That's okay. Then maybe the next episode will be better for you. The thing is, we want to present the information. We want to be true to ourselves. And we want to bring the space community together so we can all work toward a better future, not just here on Earth, but all across the galaxy.
Good stuff. Peace out, spacers. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Lift off success.
And the liftoff team, if you can stand by, I'd like to.